Thank you for joining us on Awake Radio.
You're very welcome. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Yeah, nice to speak to you. MDMA, the movie, is an upcoming full-length feature documentary by Viveca Films, produced and directed by DanceSafe founder Emanuel Sferios. That's you. The film explores the history and cultural impact of this unique drug, highlighting its medical role in the treatment of PTSD. Oh, I think a lot of people are going to be needing that. And harm reduction as a practical alternative to 3 decades of failed efforts at Prohibition. The Project Film Festival release date is summer of next year, 2016.
Wow, that was very well said, Catherine.
Well, thank you.
It might actually be a little longer coming out. This is my first film, and everyone that I've spoken to says, oh, it takes longer than you think. So it might end up being winter of next year. But we're hoping, 2 years maximum we'll have this released in theaters.
So why this topic in particular did you choose to make a documentary about?
Well, I've worked for a long time within the movements for harm reduction and drug policy reform, right? Harm reduction being the alternative to prohibition, right? That recognizes there will always be people who choose to use drugs, and our policies should be geared towards making that use as safe as possible. Prohibition actually dramatically increases the harm that results from any drug that you prohibit, really. So, and having founded DanceSafe, which is a harm reduction organization that serves mainly users of ecstasy, I, thought to myself, who is in a better position than me to make this film? And it could very well be the reason it hasn't been made yet. In 30 years, there hasn't been a definitive full-length documentary made on MDMA. But I have a lot of experience within the harm reduction movement. I have spoken to and counseled thousands of ecstasy users, tested their pills for them, etc. I understand the drug. I've taken it myself, actually the first time in 1986, 1 year before it was made, 1 year after it was made legal. So my history with it goes back a long ways, and I feel very qualified to produce a good documentary that moves the conversation forward around drug policy in this country.
A month or so ago, a couple of months ago, I interviewed a Dr. Michael Mithover. He was in a documentary called Neurons to Nirvana, speaking exactly about what you're talking about and the use of psychedelics in the used appropriately can help to heal things like post-traumatic stress, which I think today like 90% of the population has post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, I think you're right. Post-traumatic stress is different from post-traumatic stress disorder. When you add the D on it, it's when it's so severe that there's this really awful confluence of symptoms, and call it a syndrome or disorder. But I think that post-traumatic stress affects everybody. Just being bullied when you were a child, or getting in a car accident. There are many things that then linger within our psyche and can be easily triggered, even in unconscious ways, causing us a lot of stress and anxiety and taking years off our lives, etc. And MDMA in particular, of all the psychedelics, is very, very useful in treating post-traumatic stress. And Michael and Annie Mithover are the therapists who are currently undertaking the FDA-approved studies using MDMA to treat veterans, firefighters, and police and other rape survivors. The phase 2 studies are ending right now, and phase 3 should be beginning in a year or two, and MDMA is actually poised to be approved by the FDA in 2021 for the treatment of PTSD. because of the success of these studies.
And I wanted to just make the point, because I've studied, about health and healing and, psychological and physical healing all of my life, in particular post-traumatic stress. The fact that we live in a debt-based society, I feel like, people are taught to actually create debt in their own bodies so that when you do get injured, traumatized in any kind of way, your body doesn't ever get a chance to heal. It almost gets put further and further into debt because we just don't live in a healing society that and people not really knowing how to just listen to someone and let them feel their valid feelings. And so that's how a person just ends up, holding things in because nobody, wants to hear anything negative in this world,
That's very interesting that you bring that up. I mean, not just the debt analogy, which is interesting, but also the way in which our culture represses trauma and traumatic experiences, largely because we live in a war culture, right? And this is what happened in the 60s when LSD came on the scene. The reaction of Nixon and that generation against the hippies of the 60s who were using LSD was really a reaction against the way in which our culture tried to deal with the post-traumatic stress that resulted from World War II, which was to repress it.
Right.
If you look at 50s culture, right after, there was no time in our country where we had more people with PTSD than after World War II, even worse than today. And the way our culture dealt with that was to repress it and say, everything is great, we're on top of the world. And you look at 50s culture and it's all about that, right? It's show tunes and nothing to worry about, right? And then here you had the children of these veterans growing up, seeing this culture and the way that they were told the world was like, in direct contrast to what they were experiencing in their homes and their families with domestic violence and suicide. And now they become teenagers and young adults in the 60s, right when LSD is released on the scene. And somewhat like MDMA, LSD can also be therapeutic and snap people out of habitual ways of thinking. And then on top of it all, we had the Vietnam War, and the government wants to send, you want to send us to war? And so there was this perfect storm, so to speak, for LSD to become situated within an anti-war, anti-establishment kind of, a screw you type of, attitude that frightened the hell out of the likes of Nixon and that generation, which led to him, what we call the second wave of the drug war, right? Putting thousands of people in jail. He called Timothy Leary public enemy number one. And in an ironic way, it was all about our inability to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. What's so encouraging today is that now a new psychedelic is out, MDMA, and it appears like it is getting the mainstreaming and legitimacy and the recognition that it needs to have, and we may actually start dealing appropriately with this issue, which could have dramatic and radical effects on our positive effects on our culture and our society.
Right. So, I do a lot of, events and cover events, and they had one back in March, Spring Rising, an anti-war event down in D.C. with military families against war, veterans against the war, and a lot of people who spoke, families who lost sons, Sean Young, who later died of his injuries, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember the other one's name, Kevin Lucy's son, who committed suicide after coming back from Iraq. And, and the topic, comes up about, everything is just like so hyper masculinized, and because everything is for profit, and the same way that corporations want to just take the resources and just keep taking resources from the earth. I mean, people end up kind of doing the same thing unknowingly sometimes to their own bodies when they think they're getting involved in a good cause, like the military or even the police now, when it ends up just being, it ends up just, robbing people's souls.
You're very right about that. In fact, it's very interesting. All of the PTSD subjects, individuals who I interviewed, their PTSD was very much related to a moral, ethical crisis of identity. I used to think that PTSD was just, you're in a traumatic experience, you're in a war, say, and people are shooting you, trying to kill you, or you're a rape survivor, and now you fear that you're going to, people are still wanting to rape you, or you fear that people are still out to get you and trying to kill you, and it's just like this heightened fear response. It was an overly simplistic understanding of PTSD. In interviewing these veterans and a rape survivor, what I learned is that PTSD is about your sense of identity, and it usually involves a great deal of guilt. For example, one Marine veteran that I interviewed accidentally killed 2 young children in Iraq in front of their parents. It's a really tragic story, and these children haunted him for 6 years. He said on camera, "I thought I was a monster." And it wasn't until his MDMA therapy that he was able to forgive himself for that experience, and his nightmares stopped. He was able to sleep, and he's had such a reduction in his symptoms that he doesn't qualify it anymore under the CAPS scores for having PTSD. There's this series of questions that they're called CAPS questions. And so he was essentially says he's cured of his PTSD. And even the rape survivor that I interviewed, it was childhood rape, and one could wonder, why would you blame yourself for that? But that's exactly what happens. This woman felt that these horrible things must have happened to her because she was a bad person. The universe was, telling her something about herself, and her MDMA therapy let her understand that trauma experience in such a way that it released her, what she said, from this prison, this internal prison where she was internalizing the guilt, believing that she was responsible for her own rape.
Well, that's what a child does.
Mm-hmm.
Because, right, I mean, they're not going to blame the adult because I studied so much psych, so, that's what a child does. They always blame themselves instead of, to me, it's the microcosm of the macrocosm that we have going on today where people bail out the bankers, at their own expense kind of thing.
Right.
Because I'm always asking myself, how did the banks get bailed out? And it's the same thing with the family system. Somebody in power is abusive. The subordinate always blames themselves and bail.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. Debtors who believe it's their own fault when they can't pay their loans back.
See, I'm telling you right now, people need to study the dynamics of the abusive and dysfunctional family system, because once you study that and just the dynamics of relationships in general, it applies to everything on every scale, no matter how large, even the too big to fail bankers.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Like when you're a kid, it's like your alcoholic father, you can't do anything. But when you grow up, there's this movie called White Irish Drunks. They actually filmed it in my neighborhood over here in Bay Ridge a couple of years ago. And, by the end of the movie, the guy, his brother got killed. Like the father used to beat up his brother, and the brother ended up dying. And at the end of the movie, he leaves town and he gives his father a really good punch in the face before he leaves town. And I'm just like, that's exactly what we need to do to the too big to fails.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Didn't Iceland do it?
It's not complicated.
Right. Greece tried to do it until they got betrayed by their prime minister, right?
Right, so maybe he's another one that they ought to set up in line and punch in the face.
Yeah.
But I wanted to also point out the fact that it's, you know, they're using these, what is the technical name? Remote aerial vehicles, also known as drones, to supposedly protect soldiers from physical and psychological harm, but even they get post-traumatic stress. Drone operators sitting in air-conditioned offices in Arizona.
Oh yeah, actually, I've never heard the argument that they made drones to protect the soldiers from PTSD. I don't think that that's even
well, they try to say that. They try to act like they're trying to protect the soldiers.
Well, it protects them from dying because they're not in the plane, or they can't get shot down. But you're absolutely right. Drone operators suffer PTSD all the time. They're killing children. They're approving the release of these missiles that end up killing lots of innocent people all the time.
And so, talk a little bit more about MDMA, movie.
Okay, so you know we've been talking about the medical side of MDMA, its use in psychotherapy, and I can talk a little bit more about that. Along with the studies using it to treat PTSD, there are also two other studies going on right now. One is for end-of-life anxiety in patients with terminal cancer. MDMA has a unique ability to help facilitate communication among family members and release some of the anxiety that everyone in the family, not just the patient with the cancer, but their loved ones also, are dealing with when that diagnosis is given. That was one of the original uses back in the 70s when MDMA was discovered. It was used by a network of therapists for a good 10 years before it was banned. It was only banned when it started leaking out into the club scene, particularly in Texas. And Senator Lloyd Benson at the time decided to make it his campaign to crack down on the new demon drug, et cetera, and the DEA banned it in '85. But it was a medicine before it was used recreationally. The other study that's going on right now is they're giving MDMA to adults on the autistic spectrum. This is happening in Los Angeles. It's researchers by the name of Alicia Danforth and Charlie Grove. Basically, because of anecdotal evidence on the internet among recreational users, people who have used it recreationally, quote unquote, right? Because there really isn't a hard distinction between recreation and therapy, especially when it comes to medicine like MDMA. But a lot of autistic adults would report online about how MDMA helped them connect with their own emotions,
right,
understand the emotions of other people. And Alicia Danforth did I think it was a dissertation, or she did a study on this, and as a result, put together the protocols to test this in adults with autistic disorders. So that study is going on right now, and we'll see the outcome of that in a year or so. So MDMA medically has a number of different uses, and has been known for a very long time to be a therapeutic adjunct, right? So in the medical setting, this isn't a drug. When it gets approved medically, you'll get it from your pharmacist. You will you will go to a therapist who's licensed to administer it. And that's the ethical side. But as far as drug policy reform goes, that's not enough, right? At most, a few thousand individuals are going to be able to get MDMA therapy each year because, it's 1 to 3 times in a controlled environment. That approval from the FDA, set to happen in 2021, is not going to affect the recreational market at all. There are other drugs that are approved for medical purposes, all right? Methamphetamine, cocaine, very strong opiates. They have medical use, but there's still a drug war going on that creates lots of problems. And that's still going to be the case with MDMA. And so the other half of the film really is about drug education approaches and drug policy. What ought our policies to be to have rational, society where we minimize the harms resulting from the use of drugs? And around MDMA and psychedelics, there are some models that have been proposed. Mostly, they're around legal regulation to reduce the adulterated criminal market. The greatest risk of taking MDMA, also known as ecstasy or Molly, in the US it's called Molly these days, in Europe they still call it ecstasy, and the greatest risk is that you're actually going to take a drug, going to get something that's not MDMA, because there are hundreds of other synthetic drugs being sold today under the names ecstasy and Molly. And this is a direct result of prohibition. Because MDMA is prohibited and the precursors to manufacture it are heavily controlled and thus risky to purchase, chemists are producing other drugs that are less risky to make or cheaper to make, and they're selling them as under the names ecstasy or Molly. Dealers are buying them and going out to events and selling them and saying, oh, this is the great Molly, but really it's, say, a bath salt like alpha PVP or methylone or mephedrone, etc. Some of these other drugs, like paramethoxyamphetamine or PMA, are extraordinarily dangerous and have killed hundreds and hundreds of people. In 2011, there were 27 deaths from paramethoxyamphetamine in Canada within an 11-month period. A batch of this comes around and you see these big waves of deaths, right? People forget that during alcohol prohibition, there were also thousands of deaths each year from, wood alcohol and other adulterated forms of alcohol, and partially contributed to the ending of prohibition. Well, we're seeing the same thing today on the MDMA market, and the calls for legal regulation of the recreational market are largely about eliminating the adulterants because, again, MDMA itself is relatively benign compared to some of these other drugs, though it can cause fatalities. There are approximately 15 deaths a year in the United States now related to pure MDMA, and they're usually either an overdose or, more likely than that, is heat stroke, because MDMA, even in a normal dose, will slightly inhibit your body's ability to maintain its temperature. And so if you're in a very hot nightclub, for example, and you're dancing aerobically and water is $8 a bottle and it's 100 degrees inside, you can more easily die of heat stroke. And this has happened to a lot of people, and we'll be following the story of Shelley Goldsmith and her mother, who's become an activist for harm reduction after her daughter died in a nightclub in Washington, D.C. of heat stroke after she took MDMA. She wants to change drug policies to bring harm reduction measures into the conversation. So that's going to be part of the movie as well.
Are you able to talk a little bit about exactly how the MDMA, like what does it do to the nervous system in order to help it to...
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, MDMA is a serotonin releaser. It's the only, selective serotonin releaser that we know of right now. It basically, all it does is it binds to the serotonin reuptake transporter and causes it to release its serotonin into the brain. SSRIs.
So it's kind of like a legitimate, like QE3 for the nervous system, but like for real, not fake, like Ben Bernanke does it.
Well, what's QE3? I hadn't heard of that.
Quantitative easing.
Oh, you bring it back to the financial metaphor.
I'm kind of doing that on purpose because I really want people, because I think it's all connected. I really do. I believe that our health, physically, psychologically, spiritually, is deliberately being rigged to run just like the fake economy is, and to keep people in debt on purpose.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Economically, I believe you're absolutely right about that. I'm not so sure MDMA is banned for any sort of sinister reason that they don't want people to be emotionally healthy. I think that they actually. I think we're going to see psychedelics legalized. I really do, and I don't think it's going to have like too dramatic an impact on, you know, the peace movement. We are still, even when psychedelics become legalized, we're still going to be living in a imperialist country, and we need to continue to fight for equality and peace. That's going to, you know, always be the case. But I just want to go back, in case your listeners were stuck on the pharmacology a bit, just to sort of flesh it out a bit more. Drugs like Prozac and Zoloft and Celexa are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They're antidepressants that work by preventing the serotonin that's floating around in your brain to be reabsorbed and put back into storage, allowing a little more serotonin to build up over time. And so you have some greater serotonin activity, like in a small way all the time. Like that's how these SSRI antidepressants work. MDMA works on the same transporter molecule, but instead of just plugging it, allowing the serotonin to slowly build up over time, it actually causes that transporter molecule to release all of the stored serotonin. So you can think of it as sort of a super antidepressant effect that lasts for 4 to 6 hours. And that can be profoundly therapeutic. That the release of serotonin reduces activity in the amygdala where fear is processed. So anxiety is greatly reduced, and there's this immense feeling of relaxation. Other anti-anxiety drugs tend to stupefy a person, however, like Valium and Klonopin, these benzodiazepines, which are not very good therapeutically. Even though they reduce anxiety, they kind of put the person into like a stupor, and they don't remember things. Yeah. MDMA, because it only works on serotonin, has this unique ability to not only reduce anxiety, but also make you very alert and increase activity in the frontal cortex. So while you have this reduction in anxiety, you also have a greater ability to make new neural connections in the frontal cortex, to literally think new thoughts. And this is one reason why it's so successful in therapy, because you can process really, traumatic past experience and rethink about them without having a panic attack, without snapping into your habitual ways of thinking. And then that lasts even after the therapy session. You have now made new neurochemical pathways, and you strengthen those thoughts, and you can continue to think in new ways even when you're not on the drug.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that it is kind of healing an actual physical injury in the brain.
Oh, absolutely. There are very clear pharmacological or biochemical effects, mechanisms of action that can be described with MDMA. Particularly when you're talking about PTSD, to the degree that PTSD is largely about your brain being stuck in negative self-doubt, self-criticism, negative thoughts and ways of thinking that are real tied in with an overactive amygdala, a lot of anxiety and fear, to the degree that that's what's going on, and we believe that is. There have been MRI studies on PTSD, things like that. MDMA changes those brain activities. There's been an interesting side effect of the studies that they didn't anticipate, but a lot of times PTSD goes along with traumatic brain injury, and people that have suffered traumatic brain injury often lose the ability to do certain things. I mean, it could be a physical thing, like the way they use their hands, or it could be memory issues, like someone told me they'd have to write down everything that they needed to do during the day before their brain injury, and they weren't able to kind of keep it in their head. And that after her PTSD therapy on MDMA, her traumatic brain injury effects went away because MDMA actually increases neuroplasticity. To understand this on a deeper level, you have to understand how the serotonin system works, how serotonin is like researchers call it a globalizing neurotransmitter. It's excitatory in the areas of the brain that matter, and it's inhibitory in areas of the brain that really creates a perfect, kind of therapeutic experience that allows you to recode your mind, relearn things. It's a remarkable drug, and in fact, it's one of the most studied drugs we know. There have been thousands and thousands of studies on animals and humans because neuroscientists are so fascinated by its subjective effects.
The nervous system is my favorite, complete favorite, and especially post-traumatic stress. I've read a few books about how to heal stress from the nervous system. Peter Levine, in his book and his work, it's called Waking the Tiger. And he basically, he doesn't talk about MDMA. It was actually some years ago that I actually moved to Boulder, Colorado, to sort of meet this guy, through therapy. What kind of therapy? What is the therapy that goes along with the MDMA treatment?
You may have spoken more with Michael Mithover about that, who is one of the therapists. I've read the protocols online. I'm not a therapist, but my understanding is it's a very non-directed type of therapy. The patient and the therapist have some sessions not on the drug, just to get to know one another, and a lot of that's really just kind of going over what the MDMA experience is going to be like. And then while on the drug, the patient spends a lot of time just sort of thinking. They even can put on, if they choose, a blindfold to kind of not be distracted. And the therapist really is just there to sort of, help the person if they're having any problems, maybe ask a question, an open-ended question here and there. But it's not a very difficult protocol to learn.
Oh, well, that's good.
Which means, and I've told this to a lot of veterans, since I've started making this film, I've received a number of emails from people asking, about the study, where can I get in?
Yeah, where do you get in?
Yeah, well, unfortunately right now, the PTSD study is closed, but again, in a year or two, a new one should be opening with a lot more potential subjects. But I think the other two studies, the autism study and the end-of-life anxiety for terminal patients, might still be accepting patients, and you can go to MAPS.org, MAPS.org. That's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and go to the MDMA tab and look at ongoing studies or current studies like that, and people might be able to get in them. But what I've told other people, especially with PTSD, especially veterans, if you can't get into the study, before you do anything drastic, try to find the drug yourself and find somebody to be your therapist, because you don't need to go to a professional therapist. And 22 veterans a day are killing themselves. And so before you do that, there is hope. And all you got to do is make sure you find real MDMA. And how to do that, you're on your own. But I can tell you there are ways to test it to make sure it's real. One of them is to purchase a testing kit from DanceSafe.org. That's dance, like go out dancing, and safe as in safety. One word, DanceSafe.org. That's the nonprofit that I founded 17 years ago. And it sells, I'm no longer with DanceSafe, I'm doing other things, but the organization is still around, and they sell MDMA testing kits, chemical reagents that you can use to get a high degree of confidence that what you have is MDMA. However, it's not the reagent tests, the home test kits that you can buy actually aren't 100%. So what you really need to do is when you get your sample from whoever you bought it from, you can send a little bit of it into a laboratory in Sacramento, and they will test it for you using gas chromatography, and the results will be posted to ecstasydata.org. ecstasydata.org. That's a lab testing program that I founded also back in 1999. It was hosted on the DanceSafe site for a while, and when I resigned, the folks at Arrowhead.org, a drug education site, took it over and have been managing it very well ever since on ecstasydata.org. And it costs about $100, but after your sample is tested, you will know for sure what you have. And so then you need a milligram scale because you need to measure your dose out. It needs to be between 70 and 125 milligrams. Those are the therapeutic doses that work.
Wait, say the numbers again.
Say it again?
Say, what were those milligram numbers again?
Set between 70 and 125 milligrams is an appropriate dose. Below 70, it's not enough, and above 125 is too much. So, different doses will affect people a little bit better on the high end or low end. I can't tell a person the best dose for them.
Body weight, does it go according to body weight?
It does not go according to body weight. That's a myth, because drugs cross the blood-brain barrier differently, and then fat versus bone weight, it's never really matter. More significant than that really is how well your liver processes it, and it's very difficult to tell how your liver works. But you'll be in the right range between 70 and 125 milligrams, and you just find someone you trust. Someone that you know only has your best interest in mind. You go to the MAPS website, you read the protocols, and you can do this therapy with a friend. So if you're a sufferer of PTSD out there, before you do something drastic, please consider that, because it can help a lot of people.
And is MDMA legal? If you try to get it, are you gonna?
No, it is illegal. That's what I'm saying. The only legal way to do it is to get into one of the studies.
I see.
But there's limited room in those studies. I'm just saying, before you kill yourself,
right.
Break a law, break a bad law.
Exactly. Well, that makes perfect sense, of course, in this country.
Right.
So you said the studies are closed, and what was the reason again why they were closed? Just because
So the way a drug is brought to market through the FDA, you have to do a series of studies. They're just called phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is kind of exploratory with a very small number of people. Phase 2 has a moderate amount of people. And phase 3 is a large amount of people. And so the phase 2 studies are just ending. Unfortunately, it's too late to get in. Then those results are going to be finalized and published, etc. And the preliminary results are very, very positive. Over 83% of the subjects in the phase 2 study no longer met the criteria for PTSD.
Wow, that is amazing. That is amazing. Yeah. And I'm sorry, finish.
So the phase 3 studies are going to begin at some point, I think within a year or two, I'm not so sure exactly. And then there will be a much larger number of patients that will be allowed to enter that study.
And the place you mentioned before, MAPS, because I actually went to their website when I had Dr. Mithover on. Is that the only institution that is conducting these studies?
Yeah, the only MDMA studies for therapeutic purposes are being conducted by MAPS. So, and there are 3. I think there might even be more. So, you go and check them out. Go and check out the MAPS website, and again, go to the MDMA tab, and you can find the ongoing studies page.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? We have a few more minutes left till our time.
Well, actually, I can tell people, if you want to find out more about the movie, go to mdmathemovie.com. You can sign up to get on our email list and receive updates. We're still in the early stages of production, and we're still fundraising. We raised $50,000 on our first crowdfunding campaign. And,
congratulations, that's awesome.
Thank you. And that was before we had even a website. I launched the website and the Facebook page the same week I launched the crowdfunding campaign. So we're hoping to put together some more pre-release videos, and maybe this winter we'll do a second crowdfunding campaign. We're also soliciting investments and donations in other ways, and we hope to release the film, like I said, within a year and a half or two at the most.
How long is the movie?
It's going to be a full-length feature film, anywhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours. We're going to do the film festivals and a limited theatrical release, and hope to sell it to distributors in various secondary markets like the European markets. MDMA is an international phenomenon. In fact, European countries have much more enlightened drug policies than the United States. So we plan to film in the Netherlands, who leads the world in harm reduction. They've been providing pill testing services, adulterant screening, right, for MDMA users for over 20 years now. We're going to film in Portugal, where all drugs have been decriminalized, and talk to folks there about that experiment, which has been going very, very well. They've actually not only reduced overdoses, kept people out of prison, saved money, they've actually reduced drug use. Very, very interesting. We got a few more minutes. I'd like to say, most people, when they think of legalization, they think of marijuana legalization, where the goal has very explicitly been to increase access to the drug, right? Every state that has passed reforms, either medical or recreational marijuana, has allowed backyard cultivation, and the whole idea is a taxable retail market, and access to marijuana, even to minors, is probably increasing, and nobody is concerned about that. But that's because marijuana is in a very unique position among all drugs, including especially alcohol and cigarettes, and that is that no one has ever died from marijuana. So voters, clearly and with good reason, are not concerned about an increased access to marijuana, and this is why we're seeing marijuana legalization, a very liberal type of legalization. The regulations around marijuana are very liberal. But that's all people think of when they think about legalization. But legalization of other drugs should not and will not proceed in the same way as marijuana, because other drugs do have dangers. MDMA today is killing about 15 to 20 people a year, and it's because of bad drug policies, and we do not want to see MDMA legalized in the same way as marijuana, where it's just available in retail outlets anywhere, and that would probably not be the best way. There are models for legal regulation of drugs that do pose more dangers, where you can eliminate the criminal market by providing adults with some mechanism for safe legal access. I like to look at heroin maintenance programs as sort of the strictest model in this regard. Switzerland, Germany, other countries have allowed heroin addicts to obtain legal heroin from doctors and administered 3 times a day, as much as they want. There have been no overdoses. They have to give up their driver's license. But the effect that this has had by removing all addicts from the heroin market, in Switzerland, for example, they've dried up the profits on the heroin market, and they're seeing significantly fewer new heroin addicts each year. You remove the addicts from the market, there's less heroin, there's less dealers go out of business, etc. In the same way, if we had sort of a middle ground between marijuana and heroin with regards to MDMA, and we allowed adults limited quantities per month, we removed all the adults from the criminal MDMA market, we would dry up that market, not only eliminating the adulterants that are on that market that are jeopardizing lives, but also make MDMA less available to minors. And I think that's something that even conservatives can get behind. And that's the way we need to move forward. We need regulation of drugs because prohibition is actually the absence of regulation. It turns the market over to criminals. And criminals don't ask for ID. They'll sell to anyone.
And right, like, so not criminalizing people. I mean, you got to take the criminal element out of everything and the profit motive. I mean, in this, country, I mean, I do like a lot of shows when the guest after you is going to be talking about, the justice system and how it's just for profit, and the prison system has become for profit, and that's why they create the war on drugs, and everything is a war.
Right. Yes. Yeah, a lot of hurdles to climb, but the two areas that we're seeing progress, I hate to say the only two areas, but it really feels that way, are gay rights and drug policy reform. So I actually have some hope we're going to continue to see positive progressive change in drug policy in this country. Yeah,
thank you so much, Emanuel Sferios.
Sferios. Yes, and you're very welcome. Thank you, Catherine. It's been great to be on your show.
Right, so it's mdmathemovie.com.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much. And please come back and maybe just before your movie is going to come out.
Oh, definitely. Anytime.
Okay.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye.